Once upon a time there was a little island called Sodor, and on that island there was a railway. The railway was run by a little engine named Edward. He was the Northwestern Railway No. 2 engine. The railway felt lonely, so the controller of the railway, Sir Topham Hatt I, decided to get more engines. The first engine he bought to help out was a little tank engine named Thomas. He wasn't originally green, but in these stories, he'll be blue. But later on, there was a lot of demand for passengers, and the passenger trains got really big, so Edward couldn't pull them. So he called in a big engine named Henry. Henry wasn't always green. He had originally been blue, but for these stories, he'll be green. But suddenly, Henry started to have troubles, so they had to call in another big engine called Gordon. He was always blue in these stories, so nothing really changed about him. Then Sir Topham Hatt I decided to get another mixed traffic engine. So, he got one around the same size as Edward, called James. And James wasn't always red. He had been black for a few portions of the story, but for all of these ones, he'll be red. It was an early morning on the island of Sodor, and all of Thomas's friends were asleep, except for Thomas. He was sitting awake, just wondering about what he could do today, when Henry immediately woke up. Beep, beep! Little Thomas, I need you to organize my first train of the day, since I always pull the first express of the day. Henry, it's not the express, remember? You keep thinking that, but it's not. Whatever, Thomas. Just shunt it. No, said James. First he has to shunt my freight train. Actually, said Edward, Thomas is going to shunt my train first. No, said Gordon. He's going to shunt my express first. Guys, shouted Thomas. I only pick one of you to shunt first. Then I'll shunt the next train, then the next train, and then the last train. I have to shunt Henry's first because his train is the first train of the day. Then I'll shunt yours, James. Then I'll shunt Edward's, and then I'll shunt Gordon's express. And with that, Thomas rolled away. Thomas was being worked off his wheels. First he shunted Henry's express, then James's goods train, and finally, Edward's smaller freight train. Thanks to Thomas, all the other engines' trains ran on time. But Thomas was especially tired, and Henry teased him about it. What's the matter, Thomas? Are you out of breath? No, I'm not. I'm just taking a short break. I'm definitely not out of breath. Oh, Henry, don't tease him like that. He's just a young tank engine. Fine, Edward, whatever. And Henry set off with his first express of the day. Don't listen to him, Thomas. He's just teasing you. I know, but it annoys me so much. Just let it roll down your boiler, and you'll be fine. And Edward chuffed away. Thomas was very tired as he backed into a siding to finally have a rest. It finally feels good to finally rest my wheels and cool my boiler for just 1 minute before I have to... Thomas, you have to shunt Gordon's express. Did you forget? Oh, come on, groaned Thomas. I was just getting comfortable. Just then, Henry rattled through the station. He heard what Thomas had said. Oh, what's the matter, Thomas? Are you out of breath? Ha ha, said Henry as he rolled by. Grrr, groaned Thomas as he slowly chuffed away to shunt Gordon's coaches. Hurry up, you, said Gordon. Hurry up yourself, said Thomas. You could have gotten your own coaches. Pah! Tender engines don't shunt. I can't believe you would even think for a second that us tender engines would even think of shunting for even 1 second, said James. And then he snootily puffed away. You little tank engines are so revolting, said Gordon. And he moved off to couple up to his express. A workman came over to uncouple Thomas from the coaches. But before he had a chance, Gordon quickly steamed out of the station, and with Thomas still coupled on. Gordon knew this, but he decided to teach Thomas a lesson for talking about shunting. Gordon, I'm still coupled on. Gordon, stop! Gordon! Edward watched horrifically as Gordon trundled out of the station with Thomas still coupled on. James, who was also leaving the station, stopped in his tracks when he saw Gordon race by with Thomas at the back. Help! Hurry! That night, when Thomas returned to the sheds, he was glad it was empty. He didn't want anyone to know what happened. Thomas felt okay about sharing what happened with Edward. When Henry arrived at the sheds, he laughed and laughed. Fancy, a little tank engine riding on the back of Gordon's Express. I find that very funny. Thomas was cross, but Henry just laughed at him. It isn't wrong, Thomas, but it's just so darn silly. No one said a word for the rest of the night. The next morning, Henry didn't feel well. His fire seemed to not be able to start, and his boiler was too cold. I don't feel well today, moaned Henry. Perhaps it's all that teasing you did, said Thomas. That could have worn you out. Edward and James found this funny. They began to laugh at Henry. Really, old Henry has a cold firebox, laughed James, and he puffed away. Good luck today, Thomas. And Henry, you're really going to need good luck. Edward laughed and then left the sheds. What's the matter, Henry? Asked Thomas. Are you out of breath? And Thomas left the sheds, laughing. Henry did nothing but slink back into his shed and sigh.